Okay. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming. This is so exciting, to have so many people here, so many wonderful, familiar faces, people that are all the way across Canada, from Vancouver to Halifax. We have people from all over the United States, and we even have people from Costa Rica and possibly New Zealand. I don't see them, but they're probably sleeping. But in any case, it's really wonderful that everybody can be here. I really wanted to go straight to Mayfield and give this talk in person, but COVID limitations did not allow for that. So this is even better, it turns out, because we have people from all over able to attend. And of course, the Graves County, Western Kentucky, Western Tennessee, Central Tennessee population is the most intense readership for Darkfire that I could get. And so I feel really, anxious to do this well for you. You are the most knowledgeable, most invested audience I'll ever have for Darkfire. So I want to thank everybody at the Jackson Purchase Historical Society, most notably Dr. Bruce Dobbins and Dr. Bill Mulligan for setting us up and for the invitation in the first place. I want to thank everybody at the Graves County Public Library. You have always been so supportive of my work, and I really appreciate that. Nance Gunn and everyone at the Ice House for selling the book for me in Graves County. Thank you so much. And to everyone attending today, whether you're in person at the library, on your telephone, or online on your computers. Thank you so much for coming. A lot of you will already know the background of Darkfire, why I wrote it, so I'll keep this part as short as I can, and then I want to give you a reading from the book, and then we'll throw it back to the moderators to field the question and answer part. And anybody can ask me questions. If you can find your chat or Q&A button on screen, you can type in a question, and it will be sent to the moderators, or I think you can maybe do it in person over the computer. I'm not sure about that part, but we'll find out when we get there. The story of the Drew and Lawrence massacres was told to us, my brothers and sisters and myself, by Daddy. And it was one of two stories he told us that stayed with me in a really visceral way, and made me feel that those stories needed to be brought to the page. And so in the 1980s and 1990s, Daddy died in 1984. And it was after that that I began researching. Whenever I would go home to visit mom or family, I would research these stories while I was there. And I researched them at the same time and wrote them both up. I had the final version of Darkfire that you have yourselves, or that is for sale at the Ice House. That version was written in 2001, which is the year my mother died. The other one is the story of John Thompson, whom most of you will not know anything about. He was a man of mixed race from Mayfield, or from Graves County. And his story is also fascinating. I wrote it up with the title, The Arithmetic of Color, and I'll be releasing that one, I hope, all things being well, next year. But I needed to get the story of Darkfire out this year, 2021, because it's the centenary of those deaths. I woke up on January 2nd, 2020, and thought, 20, we're in the 20s. Oh my God. This is the centenary decade for those stories that I researched and wrote, tried so hard over the years to get published. I need to take the bull by the horns and self-publish them. Luckily, the publishing industry has changed a fair bit in these past 25, 30 years, and it's no longer something you have to hang your head in shame over to self-publish a book. So it has been a good experience for me, I have to say. Lulu.com is a good company if you're thinking of self-publishing. They're very good. In any case, back to the research part of it, as I said, Daddy died in 1984. So when I was researching, I went to the libraries, I went to the Mayfield Messenger office, I went to the Frankfurt archives, read the coroner's report, which is quite sobering. And I also spoke to as many people as I could in Graves County who were alive at the time of the murders and remembered them. They had firsthand childhood memories, most notably my Uncle Pat Rule, whom I gave a first-person perspective in the odd chapters of the book. People have asked me, why did I choose Pat instead of Daddy as the voice? Well, Pat outlived Daddy by about 15 years. And by the time I was doing the research and understood the kinds of questions I needed to ask Daddy, he was gone. But my Uncle Pat was a remarkable storyteller, as was Daddy. And great memories these guys had. And so Pat, when he began to tell me about the story, he said, well, if you want to know that story, and he was very pleased I was asking. He said, you want to know about that story? You have to go back to March 25th, 1920 in Mayfield, because that's the night night riders took over the town and burned down the chute. And we saw it all. We lived right across the street from the chute. So his memories of that incident and all of the incidents following in the year and a half that the book covers was very, very strong. So the stories that I've put in here are real stories that people told me. I got as close to the truth as it was possible for me to get. At least I hope I did. That was my intention. I had the help of Lon Carter Barton, whom many of you will know, beloved, rightfully beloved and revered historian of Graves County. I didn't go to Mayfield High. I went to St. Mary's, and I had good history teachers at St. Mary's and at Murray and at St. Joseph's School, all of whom have representatives here today, people that are classmates of mine from those different schools. But I didn't ever have Lon Carter Barton, who really knew so much about Graves County history, to teach me. And that was a regret that I had, but we became good friends. And I'll have you know, and it is a testament to the silence that fell upon the community after the Drews and Lawrence were murdered. Lon Carter Barton knew nothing about this story when I began researching it. And that tells you a lot, because he knew most things about the county. But of course, he was a little bit younger and wasn't alive at the time. And by his time, nobody was talking about it. So I began to, after researching the story, I began to write it up. And I wrote it first as pure nonfiction. And I sent it to the University of Kentucky Press, which I figured would be the perfect place to publish the book. And they said to me, boy, this story has so much power, so much drama in it, that I think you should rewrite it as fiction. And I thought, okay, so I went back to the drawing board and started over and rewrote the book as fiction. And then I sent it to the University of Kentucky Press, and they said, we don't publish fiction. So I began sending it out to other people, trying to get agents, trying to get publishers. In 2020, when I woke up to the fact that I needed to get the book published in time for the centenary, I sent it again to University Press of Kentucky, thinking maybe, all those other people would be gone by now who said no, and I'd have another shake at it, However, they also refused it in 2020. So there was nothing left for me to do but go ahead and bring it out myself. So why did I care so much? Why did I want so much to bring this story to the public? Well, I heard a woman from Belarus speaking on CBC radio about a month and a half ago. I had never heard of her before. She's a poet, and her name is Valgina Mort, and she now lives in the States, teaches at, I don't know, Yale or Harvard or one of those places. Anyway, she said she has written a number of poetry books about the kinds of pogroms and terrorism and terrible massacres that have happened in Belarus. And she said, when people ask me why I feel I have to tell these stories, all I can say is the least we can do is remember. And that is how I feel about the Drews and Lawrences. The least we can do is remember. So when I wrote the book, I tried to have the book be, for the most part, about their lives rather than about their tragic deaths, which of course had to be part of the story as well. It was Wallace Stegner, the great Canadian-American writer Wallace Stegner, who said, when you are reading a work of literature, you are experiencing whatever the characters experience in a real way, on some level. He said, if you are reading about a person riding through Russia on a train, you are riding through Russia on a train. And I believe that firmly about the writing of fiction, even if it's creative nonfiction, maybe even more so. And so I apologize for the murders. I am terribly sorry to have had to take you through that, but I felt that it was the only way to give witness to them, was to actually describe the murders. I had the good fortune to run into the Canadian writer Sandra Birdsell. She was a writer in residence at the library up here one year, back in about 2020, in fact. And she read my book. She said, I intended to read about 10 pages, but I found I couldn't put it down. And she said, what I think you need to do is tell this story from the first person perspective, because I had written it all as the omniscient voice. And she said, and it needs to be one of the people who was murdered. And I said, how could I possibly do that? I mean, they're not there to tell the end of the story. And she said, you'll figure it out. And what I figured out was to give Pat the first person perspective in those odd chapters, and in the even chapters to tell it from the omniscient perspective, particularly trying to get to the voice and the perspective of Ola Lawrence, one of the two young mothers who died in the massacre. When I learned from the coroner's report exactly how she died, I felt that she had much to teach me. And I felt that she must have been a remarkable woman. So I wanted to give her perspective in the book. So with that, I'm going to read you some sections of the book. And this will take about 15 minutes or so. And I hope you'll bear with me and hold on for the question and answer. I want to begin with that passage of Pat remembering the burning of the chute. He, as I say, his memory is remarkable, and this is Pat's voice, as close as I could get it. We'd gone to bed that Friday night expecting just to sleep the way you do. But when we was all fast asleep, Papa come into the front room where us kids was and rolled me out of bed, blanket and all, onto the straw matting that covered the floor. He was all in a hurry, and he said in a loud whisper, Bernard, Bridget, Ruth, y'all get down on the floor and lay still. They're carrying guns, and if they's to start shooting, them bullets will pass right through these walls. Lord, I never had come out of sleep straight away into terror that way before, though it's happened to me a time or two since. The thing was, the room was being washed with waves of strange light that cast shadows across the walls and ceiling, and Mama was there too, laying on the floor, her long red hair all undone. Bridget Ruth scooted right up next to her, but me, I snaked on over to the window. Bernard asked Papa if it was night riders, and Papa said, sure as hell is, hundreds of them. He'd gone to stand beside the front door. See, our room was right off of the porch. My bed was between the front door and the window. I peeped up over the sill, and I could see a whole slew of men milling about all over 13th Street around the chute. They was carrying guns, like Papa said, and torches too, and they had their coats turned inside out. You could see them white labels clear as anything in the moonlight. I reckon they could have done without all them torches, it was so bright that night. But I didn't get to see much, because as soon as everybody seen me at the window, they hissed me down again. Then all of a sudden, Papa swore, damn it, Nell, look, Ma's out there, good God Almighty. Mama got up and stood behind Papa, kind of looking over his shoulder, and said, what in the Sam Hill is she doing? I peeped up over the sill again. Sure enough, there was Granny, standing out in the middle of the street in her night clothes, talking to a bunch of men, just like it was a Sunday morning, and they'd all just got out of church. Granny Rule was a tiny little woman, not much bigger than me at the time, and I was always small for my age. Long as I knowed her, she's dressed all in black for her widowhood, but her night clothes was white, and her long hair still mostly black, even though she must have been, let me see, she must have been at least 75 in 1920. Anyhow, she's a sweet old woman, kindly innocent, naive, I guess you'd say. And Papa said later she probably just saw some of her old farming neighbors out there and decided to go ask them what was going on. But there she was, anyway, amongst a gang of night riders. So Papa went out onto our porch and called to her. "Ma," he said, still trying to whisper at first, but finally just yelling. When she heard his voice, she turned toward it, smiling. "Ma, get yourself over here before you get hurt." "Y'all excuse me a minute," she says to them men, and they watched as she walked up to our front steps. She was out of my range of vision then, but I could hear Papa telling her it was dangerous for her to be out there in that business. She said, "Oh, Hardin, they wouldn't hurt me. They're my friends. Why, I know most every one of them." And Papa said, real frustrated, like, "Damn it, Ma, that's just the trouble." She never would come to our house that night, but she also didn't go back over to them men. She said she was going over to her own porch where I can watch the excitement in peace. Papa muttered, "I swear, I don't know how she ever lived through the Civil War." All while Papa and Granny was talking, I watched a man with a big coal oil can walking around the chute, pouring oil onto the frame building, for all the world, just like he was watering his garden. He disappeared around one side of it and come back out on the other side a few minutes later. When he raised his arm, some of them touched their torches down to the chute where he'd poured, and the flames just whooshed up and run to meet each other. I give a low whistle, and Bernard, who'd crawled over behind me to have a look, he took and pulled me back down to the floor, and the whole room filled to brimming with firelight. That was his memory of what he says was the start of the trouble and the massacre that culminated in the massacre of the Drews and Lawrences. The next passage I want to read for you takes Ola's perspective, and it's about worming tobacco. Worming began at dawn. It was still dark out when Ola started cooking breakfast. Otis and Laura came whispering to the door and put Harry and Adele into the bed she and Ernest had just gotten out of. Then as soon as they'd all eaten, Laura and the men went out to the 6-acre field to get started. Ola was washing up the dishes when Ralph began to fuss. She went over and lifted him from his crib. "You want your breakfast too, don't you, hun?" she whispered, not wishing to wake the other children. Grabbing her snuff box from the mantel, she carried Ralph out onto the back porch. From there, she could watch the sun come up over the pond. The dew-rinsed air was mild and fresh, not yet oppressive. She unbuttoned her dress, and the baby fastened himself onto her left nipple, sucking with the rhythm of a little machine. She was soon working the snuff in her mouth to a similar rhythm and thinking how lucky she was to miss the worming this year. August was a crippling month for tobacco farmers. They had just finished topping the plants, breaking off the sticky flowers till their arms ached and their fingers were glued together. But no one who had ever worked tobacco would be likely to argue the fact that worming was the most odious part of the labor involved. In the 30 days between topping and cutting, the plants had to be suckered and wormed. The process was repulsive, monotonous, and exhausting, but it had to be done. Ola was in the fields by the time she was 5 years old. Impossible as it seemed to her, it would soon be time for Fred, her oldest, to begin helping. He would go out with the others next year, sitting in the damp grass until there was enough light to see them by, and then he would crawl on his hands and knees, picking the soft green worms off the undersides of the broad leaves. They were as thick as a man's finger, and you killed them by squashing their heads between your thumb and forefinger. Squeamishness could not be tolerated. There was no time for it. "Ever worm-eating leaf cost me money," Ola's father used to say. "Y'all mash every one of them devils. It's us against them. Kill them. You kill them just as fast as you can." Some people threw them on the ground. Some people threw the worms on the ground after killing them, but Ola insisted they be stowed in a pail or a sack and saved for kitchen feed. Her disgust at mashing the worm heads had not outlived her first summer in the patch. She looked upon the memory of her childish revulsion the way you might look upon an antique turned up in a garden or passed down from your grandparents, something that has no use anymore and is merely cute. But still in all, she never had been able to bite the heads off and spit them into the dirt the way her brothers did. And she knew only too well the physical miseries of worming, the near despair of turning at the end of a long row, only to have to start back up the next. When Brother Walker talked of Adam and Eve being cast out of Eden to work by the sweat of their brows, the congregation of the Hickory Methodist Church did not drift off to daydreaming. They listened to every word because this was about them, pure and simple. Ain't no doubt in the Bible, Ralph, Ola said quietly as she shifted him to the other breast. You'll know that by the time you're 5 years old. He took hold of her finger with the concentrated grip of one working to survive. And you're going to need them strong hands of yours. The good Lord done give you what you need, didn't he, precious? He give you good, strong hands. She went on murmuring to him as the sun blazed up over the pond like a flaming sword in the hands of an angel, barring the way back to paradise. I especially wanted to read a passage from Delmer's perspective. Delmer was the 12-year-old younger brother of Otis Drew, one of the two fathers who was killed in the massacre. Otis had asked his little brother Delmer to come out and help with the crop. And then they had had such hard work for the 2 weeks that he was out there that they hadn't had time for their usual Saturday night sing-along. And they were going to have a party and celebrate Laura's 21st birthday that Saturday. So he was due to go back home into town on Saturday morning, the day of the massacre. But they left him there one extra day so he could attend the party. And of course, he was killed with all the others. I got some great pictures in the book, but I wasn't ever able to find a picture of Delmer. I don't know that there was ever one taken of him. And he was, my niece, Linda, who is working on the family tree, she said she was able to use the book to fill out a lot of her family tree. And she took photographs from the book and put them, she was putting photographs by each person's name. But she didn't have a picture of Delmer, so she put a picture of Darkfire for his portrait. I was very touched by that. So this is Delmer's perspective, the summer that he was out helping with the crop. With the coming of the mild weather, farmers all over Wills County bolted coulters to their plows and laid off their tobacco fields in 2 directions. Midway through Delmer's first week in the country, the fields were dry enough to plant. The women and children dug deep into the plant beds, careful to pull the young tobacco seedlings out whole. They laid them into baskets as gently as if they were eggs and carried them into the fields. Though the Drew farm was only 25 acres to the Lawrence's 60, they grew the same amount of tobacco, 6 acres of it, the maximum one family could manage. Otis grew his in 3 enclosed fields behind his Darkfire barn. Delmer preferred this to Ernest's one long 6-acre patch, which seemed endless as you started up each row. But at the end, in the evenings, he walked through the serpentine shadows the apple tree threw across the ground beside Otis's house and collapsed onto the front steps until supper was ready. At night, he dropped into bed beside Harry like a stone, merely bearing the image of a boy. And the final passage that I'd like to read for you is happening at the time of that party, just the last moments of the Drews and Lawrence's lives. I will not take you through the massacre itself. I doubt I could read it, but I would like to give you a sense of what they were like as it led up to their deaths. They were having the 21st birthday party for Laura that night. The south wind that had blown all day long was blowing still and felt good in the warmth of late June, even as midnight drew near. Cotton-headed with sleepiness, Delmer tried to listen as the adults became embroiled in a discussion about Dixie. I don't care what anybody says, Ola was saying. The Civil War changed everything, including Dixie. Can't be sung jaunty like no more, the way it was wrote. It's a lament now. Ought to be done slow. Like you played My Old Kentucky Home for me that time, Ernest, remember? Ernest leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed. He mumbled affirmatively. Well, I think you're plumb crazy, said Laura. Ain't nobody plays Dixie that way. Suddenly, Ernest sat up and pricked his ears. What's the matter? Otis asked. After a moment, Ernest said, Nothing, I guess. I thought I heard a horse whinny down by the creek, but it must have been carried on down to the barn on this wind. Well, I'm about ready to head on home, Laura said through a yawn. Y'all, this was the best birthday party of my whole life. I couldn't never thank you enough. They gathered up the coffee cups and pie plates and took them inside. Then they went to fetch the children. Otis set a coal oil lamp on the table beside the door. All 11 were there, and Laura was tucking her presents into Madine's buggy when a bullet shattered the upper window pane over Ralph's crib, showering him with broken glass. Ola screamed and ran to get the baby, but several more shots were fired over their heads, and suddenly all the women and children were screaming. Ernest moved instinctively toward the guns over the mantel, understanding with instant and sickening certainty what he had suppressed when he'd heard the horse down by the creek a few moments before. Midnight, a shot through an upper pane. Night riders. Thank you for listening.
Are there questions here in the room? You raise your hand. And let me ask, how hard was it? I mean, you said you didn't think you could read the murders. Was there a point in this where it almost was emotionally overwhelming? Like, it seemed like a good idea, but...
Yes. Well, I have always been concerned about the difficulties taking people through this terrible massacre. It was, when kids and Daddy told us the story, I certainly, and possibly my brothers and sisters too, I certainly thought that Daddy was a wonderful storyteller, and I just thought he may have embellished a little bit. So when I looked the stories up, what I found was that he had certainly not embellished, and he had protected us from a lot of it by not telling the details of the massacre. I learned those by reading the coroner's report and some of the newspaper reports as well. So yes, it was very, I cried a lot writing the book, and I still cry every single time I try to read that passage aloud about the murders. It's a lot to leave in people's heads, but on the other hand, for me, the need to do it was really counterbalanced by this silence that, when that overtook the community about the Drew and Lawrence massacres, and indeed including the burning of the chute and the taking over of the town. It's all connected, and it's that silencing is what really bothers me. So many people that I interviewed back in the 80s and 90s almost looked over their shoulders like, wait, we're going to talk about that? They were nervous still. 20, and it was 75 years then since it had happened. So yes, very painful thing to write about and quite overwhelming at times, but I just simply felt that I had to do it. So.
We have a question from the floor.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Go ahead.
Yes.
Bernadette, this is James Ray. Could you give us more of the details on how you come up with all this inside findings of what happened the night of the massacre? How did you find out all those details?
Well, I would just say that the coroner's report was extremely helpful. It is in the Frankfurt archives. It is written in a tobacco warehouse ledger, which I thought was interesting. That's what Coroner Merritt had at the time to write in. And he sketched out the house and exactly where all the weapons were found, the coal oil cans, all those things. And Pat and Daddy remembered seeing the fire, that the family went out in the middle of the night and were there while the house was still burning and while the bodies were inside. And I spoke with, they said that they could see the clothes, the outlines, they knew who was who while they were looking through the flames. Now I found that hard to imagine. So I talked to a friend of mine up here, Ian Gray, a remarkable man who has since died. He's a fireman, and many firemen die of brain tumors now because of all the off-gassing that's in our building materials. And he did die of a brain tumor, but he talked to me about the fire and what they would have seen. I told him what they said they'd seen, and he said, absolutely, this is very possible. It is what happens. And he explained what happens to bodies when they're on fire. And it was very painful information, but it helped me to deal. The detail of the apples in Delmer's pocket is true. So I had to imagine why he would have had his pockets full of apples. But that was all true. The fact that the ones who were killed by axe were so full of blood that they did not actually decompose like as much as the others, and they were nameable because of that, identifiable because of that. All of this was from the coroner's report and some eyewitness accounts. Thank you for the question, James.
We have a question here in Mayfield.
Hi, I am Patsy Wilson, and my mother was a Lawrence. And I remember her telling me that my granddaddy was a night rider. And I would like to know, how do you find out the family names of Ernest and any of his cousins or brothers or whatever? Do you have that information?
I do have that information. A lot of them were in Missouri, and I went and found them in Missouri and talked to them, and they were fascinating. I also have a picture that you might be interested in. It would be some of your relations of a large family standing beside a log cabin that were in the Lawrence family. I believe it was Ernest's uncle, but they were very forthcoming when I found them, and wonderful. So
Thank you.
okay, wonderful to know that you're Ernest Lawrence's relation. I'm so honored to meet you.
Well, I don't know that I am, but you know, at that time, the Lawrences all probably had to be related, because that was, you know, now my family, I had known at one time they had lived in Puryear, Tennessee, and I don't know when they came to Western Kentucky, but I do remember my mother telling me that her daddy was a night rider, and all she would say was they would go out and gather up men that wouldn't take care of their families, and they would flip up on them, and then they would take care of their families. So it'd be nice to know all the rest of the story.
Yes, okay. I'll be happy to send you what I have on the Lawrences.
Thank you.
I have a question.
We got a question up here too.
Yeah, I also come from the Lawrences.
Ah,
My great-grandmother, Josephine Lawrence, who married Charles Columbus Tucker, Ernest was her brother.
oh, fabulous.
So I would love to find out more information about the Lawrences also.
Okay. Well, this is
Our family knew nothing about this, but my grandfather's sister's family all knew about it. And that's how I found out about it, after doing research and finding all the newspaper headlines of wholesale murder and things like that. So I didn't know until this came up about the you doing this Zoom meeting. I saw it, and I haven't read your book, and I look forward to it.
great.
You could put your email in chat to everyone, and everyone would have access to it, but Bruce can distribute it as well. I thought I saw Lisa Levesque. Lisa Levesque wanted to speak.
Yeah.
Could you go now, please?
Yeah, my name is Lise. I'm a friend of Bernadette, and some things I can say about Bernadette is that not only is she a poet and a writer, she's also a terrific teacher, and she's been one of my mentors. I've been aware of the passion that she had around writing this book and rewriting it at times. And so I want to put my 2 cents in, and I have some questions at the end of this. I'll try to be as short as possible. One of the things that hit me, though, is that when you decided to give us a full description of killing a pig and butchering a pig, my jaw dropped to the floor. I couldn't believe you had put yourself through that. And so this is one of my questions. Did you ever witness butchering a pig, or did you have to research it? The other question is, did your Uncle Pat tell you the stories a bit in the dialect? Because the dialect was in the 1920s, but by then, was there still some of it in the older people around you? Or is this something that you had to research from scratch? And the third question is, please let us know how you came up with Ironing Board Press.
No. Well, thank you, Lise, so much. I'll just say to our audience, Lise herself has written a brilliant autobiography. She's a very fine writer from Quebec originally, and just a wonderful writer. So thank you for that. Pat did talk that way, the way that I have him speaking in the book. I took copious notes as he spoke. I also recorded him, and I tried really hard to get the nuances of his speech. So yes, people, before television was huge, I guess, people spoke this way. Now, not so much, although some people still do, and I love it when I hear it. But we are getting kind of sanitized now with the way we all speak. Let me see. I never have witnessed a hog killing. My friend Jeannie Niehoff Spraggs from St. John's, Kentucky, she was my best friend in high school, and she, or at least one of them, and she was wonderful to me and invited me to her home often, and I spent the night with them a lot. And she told me, I learned from them a lot about farming, and she told me about the hog killing. I would also say that one of my best sources was from the brilliant Pogue Library at Murray, Kentucky. That is a fine institution, and they have even more materials on all this era and this activity now than they had when I was researching it. But they have there a dissertation, as far as I know, still unpublished, by Suzanne Hall, and it's called Breaking Trust, the Black Patch Tobacco Culture of Kentucky and Tennessee, 1900 to 1940. So it's a long title, but if you remember Suzanne Hall, Breaking Trust, that is well worth reading to give you a lot of details about farming, and I found it extremely helpful, very useful. So, and the third question you had, Lise, was Ironing Board Press. I'm happy you asked that question. Thank you. It's an homage to my mother, because when I was a kid, my mother would let me sit at the ironing board. She would let me pull the stool that didn't have a back out of the kitchen and set it up there in the busy trafficked area of our little house. And she would let me keep it set up for as long as I needed to for whatever book or project I was writing at the time. I started writing books when I was about 7 or 8, as soon as I learned how to write. My sister Bridget was going to write a book one summer, and I thought, what? People can do that? Just write their own books? So I asked Mom if I could use the ironing board as my office, and she let me do it. So when I was looking for a name for my self-publishing press, you have to give a name for a press per se. I came up with Ironing Board Press, and I've been very happy with that because it makes me think of Mom every time I see it. So thank you for the questions, Lise, and for your wonderful comments.
We have a couple of questions on the chat. Can you see them, or do you want me to read them to you?
Can you read them to me? I can't see them.
Okay. I'm interested to learn how far this massacre occurred from the Golo community.
Okay. Well, Golo is actually where Granny Rule and Padraig Rule started out. They were both from that area. And so the massacre is in, I have my Mayfield, I have my Mayfield map, my Graves County map here. Let me see if I can, I don't think I can actually turn it around. Okay, so Golo is up in the, if you're in Mayfield, Golo is northeast of Mayfield. and Hickory is northwest of Mayfield. So it wouldn't be very far at all. There's maybe, I think I say in the book how far it is, because I did look this up at one point. Maybe 15 miles, if that, I would guess. Something like that. Not too far, because Daddy had to ride it on his bicycle after the massacre and get out to Golo and tell them about it. So yeah, so I would say 10, 12, 15 miles maybe.
The next question, how did you research and perfect the vernacular of the times so well?
Oh, well, thank you so much for that comment. It worried me to try to use the vernacular because I was afraid it would put people off. But in fact, as I said, I taped people back in the 80s and 90s, and I also took a lot of notes. And if they had a certain way of phrasing something or pronouncing something, I made note of that. So that was how I did it, really. And I must thank Greg Smith of Blind Pig Press in Grimsby, Ontario, because he is the person who designed the book. And he told me to take out all the question marks for I had it full of, not question marks, quotation marks. I had it full of quotation marks the way I was raised to write dialogue. And he said, take it out. They're not using that anymore. It clutters everything up and looks terrible. And take out all those apostrophes. I had apostrophes for dropped letters. He said, get rid of it all. And I was horrified. I thought it would ruin everything. I thought nobody would know who was speaking or whatever. But people have told me that that it has not been a problem for them. Most people. So I'm very grateful to Greg for helping me with that, because it does look smoother without all the quotation marks.
Next question, how near to the scene was your home growing up?
I think it is it 4 or 5 miles up to Hickory, maybe, all of these things I researched so long ago. So let me look at my map again here. I refer to it all the time, this Graves County map. I'll try to show it to you here. I've got it on the wall. It's all wrinkled. There's Mayfield right in the middle. And it's been of great use to me. Yeah, I would say Hickory it's almost due north of Mayfield. And it's possibly, oh yeah, scale miles. Okay, yeah, about 4 or 5 miles maybe. Some of you have family from Hickory, I know that. So maybe you could answer the question better than I can.
The next question, any remarkable were some reactions from friends of yours when you relayed the facts recently?
Can you repeat the question?
Any remarkable were some reactions from friends of yours when you relayed the facts recently?
I would have to say that people have been incredibly generous. I have been so surprised by the response the book has gotten, because as I said, I tried for 25 years to get it published or to find an agent to help me publish it, and couldn't do it. I don't really know why that is. Maybe some of you would have an idea. Maybe part of the problem was that I was between fiction and nonfiction. That might have been an issue, although there are so many creative nonfiction works out there now that I'm not sure about that. But in any case, all I can say is I've been so gratified by the reaction. Of course, people are horrified by the massacre, but people seem to appreciate the book so much. And it is a dream come true to have something you write be received by readers the way Darkfire has been received. It's been incredible.
Here, here. The last question on the chat. I am a Murray State student and actually work for the news. I'm writing an article in the paper about your book and would like to know how your time at Murray may have shaped your writing. And that's from Ava Chu.
Well, this is wonderful to know that you're writing the article, and I hope you will send it to me when you have it finished. Thank you, Ava. yes, Murray was a very, very fine university for me. I loved my time there. I worked in the history department for a part-time job. So I got to know I actually sort of accidentally did a major in history. I did a major in English, and I ended up having as many classes in history as in English just because I loved them so much. For me, looking at what was being offered each semester was like going to the finest restaurant in the world and getting your pick of, dishes that you could eat as much as you wanted of. I loved it. And I thought the history department was a remarkable place. It was headed up by Riley Venza at that time, and Dr. Wolf, Dr. Payne, Dr. Cartwright, Dr. Oh my gosh. In the English department, Dr. Dawday, Dr. Swan. I had wonderful professors. They would all be long, long gone from Murray now. But I love the Pogue Library. I loved it when I was a student there, and I love it now. When I go home, I love to go back to the Pogue. I like to just sit on those front steps and look up at those columns. I like to look out the view out the back of the quadrangle. It is a thrilling place for me, and it is a very fine research library.
Also, I attended the service, if you want to call that, at the 100th anniversary, and it was very, very moving at the cemetery. I'll say that. But my question is, what is on the site where the massacre happened today? Have you visited it?
Okay, great question. Other people have asked me this question as well. It's a farm and it's a pasture, as I described it in the afterword of the book, our 75th celebration or memorialization of the events. At the time when I was doing the research, it was owned by Sam and Betty Workman, and they were wonderful. They didn't know what had happened on their land. They had just had it as a pasture, and they came as Sam Workman was in the Second World War, and he came home afterward and bought the farm when he was marrying Betty, and had no idea, what had happened there. So when he first took me there, I asked him, would he mind if I found the place where it had happened? And he said, well, I think I know where it is. Now, Pat knew as well, and Pat was with me. And Hunter Hancock, who taught biology at Murray, he was a best friend of Delmer Drew, and he was a great help to me in my research as well. So we went out with my brother Michael and Lon. We went out to the place, and Mr. Workman showed us the field, and he said, when we moved here, all that was here were 4 blackened foundation stones. And he said, I just took them. I didn't know what they were. I just took them and tossed them and rolled them down in the creek. And I went over to the creek and looked down, and there they were, still lying there. So, to me, that was holy ground. And it was, it really was a painful and yet a terribly fulfilling, moving experience to walk that land, to go there. I would not advise anybody to do it without checking with whoever owns it now. Sam and Betty have both died. You could go to the county clerk's office at the Mayfield courthouse and look up Sam and Betty Workman and find out the exact details, the plat or whatever it's called, the exact details of the land, and find out who owns it now and ask them. But it is private property, and I would never encourage anybody to go onto it without checking first with the owners. But if they're as kind as Sam and Betty Workman, they'll let you go. And it is a place where you want to go and commune, We actually went out there on the night. I didn't put this in the book. My sister Rosie and Lon and I and his friend Harvey, his last name is not coming to me. Anyway, the 4 of us went back out after we had our 75th vigil on June 25th, 26th of 19, what would it have been? 75 years after the death. We went out at midnight. We wanted to be there at the moment, 75 years later, when it happened. And I was fully expecting, you know, ghosts or something, but it was as peaceful as it could be. And I feel that those ghosts have been laid for in whatever way. So yeah, it's a farm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions here in Mayfield? Yes, Ann.
I have a question. I'm not from this area, but what was the chute?
Oh, thank you for asking that. I meant to explain it. When my Uncle Pat said you got to go back to when they burnt the chute, I didn't know what it was either. But it's CH, and that implies that it was an angled drive that the tobacco farmers brought their wagon loads of tobacco in to sell. And they would drive down the chute, and up on raised platforms on either side would be buyers from all over the world. Mayfield was a huge center, as was Hopkinsville, as is all of Western Kentucky and Central and Western Tennessee. Huge markets from the world over for dark-fired tobacco. It's not really grown anywhere else. And so that is what the chute was. And by burning it, the night riders and the union people were saying, you know, this is not going on anymore, because what happened was just right after the First World War, the prices plunged again. You see, there was a first round of night riding and union building, and that was about 1903 or 4 to 1908. And that was what people refer to as the Black Patch War, but they often say the Black Patch Wars. And the thing is, there are people who think that I should not use the term Black Patch War for the activities that culminated in the Drew Lawrence Massacre. There are people who think I should not spell night riders with capital N, capital R. I came across this back when I was doing the research, because I sent the book to everybody that I could at the time, everybody that I thought could give me feedback on it. And one person that I sent it to was Judge Bill Cunningham over in Catawba. And he didn't want to meet with me, but he read the book and he wrote back and said, it's a very good book, but he said, you're wrong about your details. Night riding never happened again after 1908. Well, you know, all you have to do is read the newspapers and you will find out that night riding did happen. You know, the thing is that it certainly was a slightly different round of the Black Patch Wars, or of night riding, if you want to call them that. But it has the same, these activities that culminated in the Drew Lawrence Massacre, they have the same motivation, the same methods, the same goals, the same leader in Felix Ewing, many of the same players, and they themselves called themselves night riders, and they referred to it by these terms. So I don't know what people would want me to call it, and I'd be interested in finding out the answer to that question. But for me, I'm going to use the terminology the people then used, and that was night riding and the Black Patch Wars.
We have another question on the chat from Chuck McNulty. My mother, a Trevathan, grew up in Columbus, Arlington, Fancy Farm. Did the special dark tobacco region extend that far? Did the night riders extend that far?
Yes, yes. There was night riding in 30 counties in Mayfield, in Kentucky and Tennessee. And yes, it certainly included Fancy Farm. It certainly included these areas you're talking about. I thought your mom was from Hickory, Chuck. So that's interesting, but it definitely did cover these regions. Yeah.
We have another question here in Mayfield.
Hi, Bernadette.
Hi.
I wanted to ask about the Hickory Methodist Church. Would that possibly be the Trinity United Methodist Church that's still there?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
that's in place. Yeah, it was the Hickory Methodist Church at the time. My grandfather Hardin was a Methodist, and all of his family, and this was his family who was affected, they were Methodists. And yes, it's now called the Hickory United Trinity United Church. But if you go and look in their graveyard, you will find graves of Rules and so on. Now, the Drews and Lawrences themselves, the people who were massacred, they should have been buried out of Trinity Methodist. As far as I'm concerned, that was their church. And it is exactly the same little church that stands there today. It's a beautiful little church with the rounded pews and all of it. A lovely place. In my research, I went to some meetings there. In any case, they really should have been buried there. But of course, the town took it on when the New York Times came in and what was covering this, and newspapers all over the country were covering the massacre. It just got out of the hands of the family. And I explained a little bit about that in the book, with the funeral and so forth, that they didn't even get their own minister to bury, so that's kind of another little twinge of sadness for the story.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lotta Stamper, I made up the name, but she was a real person. And that is one of the stories that I was told that I wanted to put into the book to fill out the whole story. My great Aunt Bridgie did die the way Granny told it and described it in the book. Well, that's my Granny. Nell describes it to Pat. She told me that story when I was 12. The glass game that the children were playing the last night, that's true. Implausible as it may sound, that is something Ola used to do, was to, soften the edges of the glass or smooth off the edges of broken glass and give it to the girls to play with. And so that was all true. So as I say, I've made it as close to true life as I could. And thank you so much for saying what you did, Lise. Thanks. Appreciate it.
We have a question on the chat. You said the news was delivered to Golo by driving by bicycle. Can you elaborate?
Yes, it's in the book. My father was told by his mother, Nell, to get on the bike and ride. This was in the middle of the night when dawn was coming now, and they had gone out to see the fire because the word came to them from a neighbor. The neighbor's real name was Ben Morris. I called him James January in the book because my family has a strong feeling, always had a strong feeling, the Drew family, that he was in on it, that he was there. He was the one who rode into town and told them all that it was happening. And that's why they were able to get out there in the middle of the night, and see the fire. They said you could see it on the top of the hill there in Hickory from a long, long way off. And for my part, I just imagined them in a wagon riding, hell-bent on an old gravel road out into the country. No light, like there was a full moon, but it would have been long uprisen by then, So it struck me that would have been quite a harrowing thing to ride either a horse or a wagon in the dead of night back in the day, because you wouldn't have light to go by. It really is dark in the